Hello friends and welcome to another episode of Quick Thoughts on a not so regular anymore series in which I talk about different stories from the Star Trek universe. I apologize for the lack of uploads in the last days, but I have been ill and not able to speak for a long time, but I can try now. This video will be about the next episode of the classic Star Trek TV show called The Ultimate Computer. If you watch my channel regularly, you probably know that one of my favorite Star Trek writers is D.C. Fontana. And this episode was written by D.C. Fontana, which means I can't be really objective here. But anyway, it's my channel, so what? The Enterprise flies to a stock shot of a space station when Commodore Bob Wesley, which is by the way a pen name used by Gene Roddenberry, tells him that the explanation awaits him in the transporter room. When they get to the transporter room, they are told that they have been given the privilege of being a fox on the run. Starfleet wants to drop almost all Enterprise crew members on the space station and use the ship for testing a new tactical supercomputer, the M5 Multitronic Unit, designed by the genius Dr. Richard Daystrom. Dr. Daystrom, immediately after getting on board, starts installing the computer in engineering. Kirk, Spock and McCoy want to greet him, but he behaves like an ass. This is honestly one of the very few problems I have with this episode. From the first scene we meet him, he behaves like the villain of the episode, or to be more precise, he behaves like a madman who tries to pretend that he's normal. I know they say that there's a fine line between genius and insanity, and maybe that's what they were trying to do here. I'm not sure. But he just isn't very likable, which is a problem, since we are supposed to care about his emotional state in the end. Anyway, let's go back to the plot. They start testing M5 with a few simple navigational maneuvers, and Kirk keeps switching the new computer off after each completed task, much to the dismay of its creator. When the ship under M5's control approaches the nearby planet, called Alpha Carinae 2, M5 gets the ship to orbit and makes its recommendations for the landing party members. Kirk makes his own recommendation, and they are different. M5 chose a different geologist, because it managed to cross-check the BIOS of all crew members, and it found out that the one he chose is actually more competent, because he already was on the planet before. The other difference is that M5 didn't select Kirk nor McCoy, and when asked about the reasoning behind it, M5 tells to Kirk that they are non-essential personnel. Well, M5 would need to work on his butt-kicking skills. It's usually a bad idea to tell to your boss that he's useless, even if it's the truth. Last time I told my boss that I really don't like him and told him the truth about what I really think about him. After waking up the next day, I read an email about how my services are no longer required and I should come to the office and take my personal things. Meanwhile, some decks lost all power, and Scotty found out that it was done by M5. Daystrom, after a small check, claims that it's not a bug, but a feature. You know, as a software developer myself, I can tell you one thing. If some hardware or software starts to behave strangely, and the IT support guy claims that it's actually supposed to be working like that, get rid of it as soon as possible. Daystrom claims that M5 switched off the power of the decks simply because it's trying to use the available power as effectively as possible, so it's a green computer. But Kirk's internal alarm starts blinking, and it has nothing to do with the fact that M5 insulted him. He feels that the thing is dangerous, even though he can't explain why. He has an interesting discussion with McCoy about it, and I'm pretty sure you know somebody who is afraid of computerization of everything, just like Kirk, or maybe you even agree with him. Hell, even I agree with that opinion from time to time. But whether you agree with it or not, this type of scenes is a fine example of why I am such a huge fanboy of Dorothy. Using a few lines of dialogue, she manages to tell us more about the characters than other writers tell us in a whole season. McCoy goes to the bridge with Kirk because M5 cut the power also from the sickbay. Yes, sickbay has no power. Remember it for later. A new test for M5 starts, a simulated attack done by the USS Lexington and the USS Excalibur. M5 performs perfectly, and Bob Wesley, who commanded the Lexington, congratulates to M5 and Captain Dunsel, after which Kirk leaves the bridge, looking like he doesn't want to start crying in front of his man. Dunsel is a slang term used at the academy, describing a thing which has no purpose. You guys love kicking a man who's lying down, don't you? Anyway, McCoy goes to cheer him up, but no, he doesn't bring drugs this time, he brings booze, and that's something completely different. But before they manage to get drunk, Kirk gets called back to the bridge. There is a little problem. They encountered an automated freighter called the Voden, which had nothing to do with the Wargames. But that's not a problem for M5. It actively changed course to encounter the automated ship, and before the crew members had a chance to turn it off, it destroyed the Voden. Which means Kirk has finally a good reason to unplug the M5 computer permanently. But when he tries to do it, they find out that M5 managed to create a force field around itself and can't be switched off normally. So they order a red shard to cut off its power. A red shard who we never saw before. I'm sure nothing bad will happen to him. Or he gets vaporized by M5 in the most realistic effect I have ever seen in a 1960s TV show. So the situation got really serious. M5 started to kill them and they have no way how to turn it off. And Daystrom just offers excuses instead of solutions. And he starts to behave like he thinks that the computer is his child and not his creation. They have a quick briefing where they discuss the possibilities. Spock and Scott come up with a plan and try to do some tech stuff in the Jeffries tube. Even when Daystrom tries to interfere, they think they were smart, but when Spock asks Chekhov to check the status, they find out that M5 tricked them. Which means that M5 does not only process given information, but it thinks. After they push Daystrom a bit, he tells them that he basically copied his own engrams into the computer. In other words, the computer is his even crazier copy. And to make the situation even worse, the Lexington, Excalibur, Hood and Potemkin are approaching. It is another part of the Wargames, but M5 doesn't think so. It thinks that this is a genuine attack and decides to destroy the ship. In the attack, the Excalibur and Lexington get attacked with full power, and Wesley for some reason thinks that Kirk is responsible for it. This is another thing I couldn't really understand. Wesley knows that M5 is in charge of the systems of the Enterprise, and he also knows Kirk. So why does he assume that Kirk went crazy and attacked them? Wouldn't it be much more logical to assume that this is a computer malfunction? What, did the rest of the crew also go crazy together with Kirk at the same time? Honestly, Kirk going crazy is the least probable thing that could happen. On the bridge everybody pushes on Daystrom, so he tries to talk directly to M5, but during their little chat he suffers a small nervous breakdown, and Spock has to use his famous nerve pinch. And McCoy tells them they should bring Daystrom to sickbay. Do you remember that sickbay is without power, right? So did McCoy just send him to his death? There shouldn't be any life support on sickbay right now. But we have more good news. Starfleet has agreed with Wesley and gave him the rights to destroy the Enterprise. Why does everybody in this episode hate Kirk and want to see him dead? So Kirk now has to do what he can do best, talk a computer to commit suicide. Because M5 shares his moral beliefs with his creator, and Daystrom thought that murder is punishable by death, M5 decides to commit suicide, which means that it wants to be destroyed by the Starfleet ships, which means that Kirk and company are left like sitting ducks and they can't contact Wesley. So Kirk gets a brilliant idea. He shuts down all of the systems which are still working. Wesley gets suspicious and decides not to attack the Enterprise. It shouldn't logically work, but Kirk and Wesley know each other and they know how each of them would think in a similar situation. One of the reasons why a man should be in charge of a ship and not a machine. So in the end, it all ends with a good laugh on the bridge. There are very few episodes of classic Star Trek which keep me interested from the first minute up to the final credits, and The Ultimate Computer is one of them. I think everybody has done great work, the actors, the writer, and even the director. This was the first episode directed by John Meredith Lucas, a writer and producer of the second half of the second season of the original series. He has done a couple of innovative things. For example, there is a long dialogue-heavy scene between Kirk and McCoy. Most of the directors would shoot it in a very boring way using some simple shot, reverse shot, camera setup, but he managed to make it visually interesting and a dynamic scene. Regarding the acting, there is something weird going on between Bill Shatner and Bill Marshall, the guy who played Daystrom. Every time they have a scene together, I wasn't sure if this is supposed to be Kirk antagonistic towards Daystrom, or if something else was going on. I remember reading on one forum that Shatner had something against the fact that the character is played by a black actor, but it sounds like nonsense to me. There were many black actors on the show and I don't remember any similar reactions from Shatner. But then I read something else about him and it actually sounds more reasonable. It looks like Bill Shatner had a problem with actors who were taller than him. He usually requested changes which would make him to be the tallest actor in a scene. Anyway, I love most of the acting, I love most of the script. I love the dialogue, I love the plot, I love the directing. I think that this is one of the almost perfect Star Trek episodes. On my usual scale between 0 to 10, where 0 is complete garbage, 10 is a masterpiece, and 5 is just average, I would give this episode 9 out of 10. But as always, those were just my opinions. Feel free to write down your opinions down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button, and if you have some free time, feel free to watch any of the other videos on my channel. I tried to diversify my content a bit in the last few weeks, so there is a pretty big chance you will find something interesting here. I am meanwhile preparing a video about the next episode, Bread and Circuses, which should be up in a few days. Later, after I finish doing videos about the second season of TOS, I will continue with videos about TNG, but that's a plan for the future. Thank you very much for watching and see you soon. Bye.